Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsey Reiser in for Vladimir Duthier. We continue to follow breaking news. CBS News learning that Paul Whelan, an American who has been imprisoned in Russia for nearly 6 years, and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was just sentenced by Russia to 16 years in a maximum security prison, are both part of a prisoner swap. Gershkovich, the Journal, and the State Department have consistently said the charges were false. The United States says Whelan was also wrongfully detained. Right now, we're looking at a live shot here out of Ankara, Turkey. We're seeing planes there on the tarmac. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins me now. Nancy, they're believed to be on board those planes, but we have to remind people that all this is taking place hush-hush, behind closed doors diplomacy. Remind us who Gershkovich, Whelan, and a third journalist are, and who else is part of this swap.
We understand it's a very complicated swap, so it's fascinating to see them see those planes on the ground in Ankara. But it's also possible that this could be taking place at multiple sites involving multiple prisoners. We just simply don't have all the details yet, Lindsey. As for the Americans who are involved, you're right. There are 3 of them. Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who was taken into custody last year, accused of espionage, which the U.S. government has always denied. And then there's Paul Whelan. He is a former U.S. Marine. He was taken into custody nearly 6 years ago, also accused of espionage, also sentenced to 16 years. He has been in Russian penal colonies ever since. And then the third American you mentioned is Alsu Kurmasheva. She is a Russian-American radio reporter who was also taken into custody last year. So our understanding is that all 3 of them will be coming home. We don't have the details we can share yet about any Russians who might be headed back to Russia in exchange, either from U.S. prisons or from other prisons around the world. I can tell you that it caught the eye of reporters yesterday when we started to notice that some Russian detainees were being removed from U.S. prisons. Their names were disappearing from the system. And reportedly, the Americans were leaving their Russian prisons and penal colonies as well. And that was one of the first indications that something was going down after many months of on and off negotiations.
You say many months. Have we learned anything about how this was coordinated? You are oftentimes in the White House press briefing room. We know that members of the media have been asking questions, but we're talking about, for example, in Whelan's case, 5.5 years. And so certainly, while maybe this isn't top pressing news every single day in that briefing room, important to note that things do happen behind the scenes.
This has really been an agonizing wait for the Whelan family because they've watched several other prisoner swaps take place over the years that looked like they might involve Paul, and then he was left behind. Trevor Reed was released. He was actually taken into custody after Paul, and he was released first, partly because Reed was in bad health, and U.S. officials were very concerned about him and his condition. Then you had Brittany Griner, who was taken into custody years after Paul Whelan, the basketball star. She was sent back to the U.S. in a prisoner swap last year. For whatever reason, the Russians have resisted handing Whelan over. And so these talks have been taking place. We do ask about them periodically in the White House briefing. Obviously, U.S. officials are generally reluctant to give us any kind of update, anything that might influence the negotiations. Sometimes there's a message that they want to get across to the Russians publicly. I can remember one time several months ago when suddenly, I believe it was John Kirby said, "We haven't heard from the Russians for months. We've been trying to contact them, but they've gone radio silent." And that was an unusual detail we're not used to getting. And I was told later that, it was sort of a last-ditch attempt to get the Russians to re-engage because they simply weren't taking part in the negotiations.
Nancy, stand by for us. I want to bring in CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis. So, Olivia, what do we know about the process of getting these Americans home?
Well, Lindsey, I mean, this has been described to me as one of the most complex negotiations in the history of U.S. Russia and even U.S. Soviet relations, when we, of course, knew that spies were being routinely swapped between the two countries. But the reason that this case is different is the number of players involved and the type of prisoners involved. These are not just spies. These are what we know America has deemed political prisoners in the case of Evan and Paul and Alsu, all of whom we expect to step foot on American soil later tonight. As Nancy mentioned, speculation had been mounting as the names of some prominent Russian political dissidents had disappeared from the prison rosters where they were being held. Paul Whelan's whereabouts were suddenly not known. A prominent Kremlin critic, Vladimir Karamurza, suddenly disappeared. His lawyers didn't know where he was. So there was speculation growing in recent days that something was afoot. But as you have been discussing, there are a number of U.S. government agencies that are involved in these negotiations. The White House, the State Department, the CIA in previous negotiations has been the key channel through which the Russians prefer to deal with us. And as we await further details as to who was instrumental, we do know that some families are going to be very happily reunited in a matter of hours.
And when we talk about how complex this is, I mean, part of the reason is because of all the countries involved. What can you tell us about the prisoners Russia is getting in return? I know one of them shot a former separatist fighter in broad daylight outside of Berlin Park. He was in custody in Germany.
That's right. We know from public reporting that the Russians had their eye on Vadim Krasikov, who is, yes, as you mentioned, a convicted murderer who is serving a life sentence in Germany for the assassination of a German citizen who fought against the Russian forces in Chechnya. He has been there for years, and the Russians have had their eyes on him. But that meant that he was not in U.S. custody, right? He was not the Americans to trade. And so we're still waiting for details as to whether he is, in fact, part of this trade. There's been plenty of speculation that he is, because up until this point, the Russians, as Nancy mentioned, had been reluctant to engage in any deal that the U.S. had put on the table. And we do know from U.S. officials that, as they characterize them, significant deals had been put on the table in December and over the course of the spring.
Olivia, it has been nearly 2 weeks since Gershkovich was sentenced. Why is it believed that negotiations couldn't really begin in earnest until that happened?
That's part more of the Russian process than it is the U.S. process. The Russians sort of need to do their bureaucratic paperwork. And usually as part of this, President Putin needs to officially pardon the people that he is letting out of his country. We're still seeing whether that entire process has played out. But yes, speculation, in fact, did start in early July when what was viewed as a very hurried process played out for Evan Gershkovich. People who follow this closely were saying that is a box that the Russians need to check before they let somebody go. And on the same day that his trial was running, in a secret trial, Alsu Kurmasheva was also being sentenced to 6.5 years in a Russian prison. So this was all very hurried in early July and may have been part of the groundwork that was being laid in these sensitive diplomatic and intelligence talks.
Olivia, stay with us as well. I want to bring in CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer. Liz, you've been in court with Paul Whelan in the past. What can you say about the gravity of this moment?
Well, Paul Whelan has been in custody longer than any of the other prisoners being released today. His family kept the case front and center. The U.S. Embassy in Moscow was exceptionally good in continuing to visit him. But we know that he has felt forgotten. And certainly during the COVID years, it was difficult to see him, and he would have felt very isolated. He was passed over several times. For example, when Greiner was released, everybody hoped that, or at least his family hoped that he would be released too, and it didn't happen. So today will be a huge relief for all the people, especially his brother, who've been advocating for this all this time.
You know, we had mentioned Vadim Krasikov, one of the imprisoned Russians imprisoned in Germany, that Putin was interested in getting back as part of this swap. Sort of reminds me of Victor Bout, the notorious arms dealer who was swapped for Greiner and that swap that happened. What does this tell you about why Putin and Russia want these dangerous loyalists back so badly?
Krasikov was an FSB agent, so he was an intelligence officer. And President Putin has to shore up the support of the intelligence community. That's his main constituent, like one of the pillars of his power base, and also the military. And so he makes a big deal out of getting back agents that have been taken into what he would consider enemy hands. And it's all part of the code of loyalty, showing that he is on the side of his security forces. And this will be a big part of that, and in fact will play very well in Russia, showing that the president always sticks up for his men.
Elizabeth Palmer, thank you so much. Let's bring back CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, do we expect to hear from President Biden or see him today?
I anticipate we will hear from him, Lindsey, as soon as it is confirmed that the entire prisoner swap has taken place successfully and that the Americans are safely on their way back to U.S. soil. Prior to that, the president, other U.S. officials are generally very reluctant to say anything. They don't want to do anything to anger the Russians, to jeopardize these very sensitive negotiations. So they tend to stay mum. We're not getting, any public reaction so far at all from U.S. officials for the most part, aside from confirming that this is imminent. But absolutely, as someone who has made the return of U.S. political prisoners around the world a major priority, I anticipate that President Biden will have something to say in public later today. And I'm sure he'll also want to see these Americans once they are safely back on U.S. soil and in good health, because he has met periodically with their families over the years, and he has talked about how badly he wants to bring them home. So this is no doubt a great day for him if everything goes as planned.
Nancy Cordes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For more on this, let's bring in William Pomerance. He's the senior fellow and former director of the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. First, sir, thanks for being with us. Give us your read on this.
Well, it is a piece of very good news for all of the families of the detained prisoners. So I was not expecting this deal to really be done, but it has happened, and it will be a great day when all the Americans come back to U.S. soil.
Why was this not something you were expecting? Why is this a surprise?
It was a surprise because I thought that Putin would want to kind of extend these negotiations as long as possible, so that he wants to be relevant. And this was one way, a very difficult way to be relevant as well. So I didn't think that he was going to make a deal, and I didn't think that he had a lot of pressure to make a deal. But clearly, as one of your other commentators mentioned, there are several people who were in the security services, and Putin wanted to get them out through any means. So I think this will be a positive development for Putin, although it doesn't mean that U.S.-Russian relations will be on a positive footing for a long time to come.
Do you think that Putin takes American politics into account when making these deals and making these, because while there might be some concerns, certainly the Biden administration is going to try and express to the American people that this is a win in their view?
I don't think, quite frankly, Putin understands American politics in the larger sense of the word. And so he has made so many mistakes over the last 2.5 years that I don't think he really has a clear understanding of the political situation in the United States. If he believes that somehow this helps him politically, I don't think it will. I think that the United States and its European allies have basically said that they want to hold Putin accountable for this terrible war in Ukraine. And I don't think a prisoner swap changes that position.
Of course, we've been talking about Korsakoff. I mentioned Viktor Bout. These are some of the people that Putin wanted to get out of prison and back home to show that he is loyal to them, that they're loyal to him. Are there concerns about the concessions that the U.S. had to make in these cases?
There always are concerns. And the major concern is that once these prisoners are released, that Putin will just continue to find Americans or find Americans who are on Russian soil and will do the same thing. So there is the fear that this only engages Putin, and he will do this again because he gets a deal. So that is a real concern going forward.
All right, William Pomerance, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your expertise. Let's go back to Olivia Gazis. Olivia, any developments since we last spoke to you just a few minutes ago? I know this is a rapidly evolving situation.
Sure. I think we are still waiting for all of the Americans to be wheels up from that tarmac in Ankara. And when they do, we will hear more details about how this all came to pass. But as you were just discussing there, I do think it's worth noting that the U.S. government knows there is a cost to making these trades, right? They have a justice system that has put resources towards convicting these criminals who have committed crimes and are detained in American detention systems. That is part of the reason why the State Department in particular likes to remind Americans not to give the Russians fodder, as it will. They have Russia at a level 4 travel advisory, meaning do not travel to that country. It is an adversarial country. When you are there, you are at risk of being arbitrarily detained, and it is not clear that the U.S. government can do anything to help you. As we have seen in the cases of Paul Whelan and Evan Gershkovich, they had to go through a special process within the State Department in which they were determined wrongfully detained, because it can be the case that an American citizen goes and does actually commit an infraction or break a law and are legitimately imprisoned by a foreign government. In their case, the U.S. government went through its process and determined in neither case were they actually committing any of the crimes that they were accused of. And of course, the Russians in both of their cases accused them of espionage. In Alsu Kurmasheva's case, her case was still going through that deliberative process. She had not officially been determined to have been wrongfully detained, but President Biden personally called for her by name to be released in April at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which shed additional light on her case, and from its trappings looked as though she, like Evan Gershkovich, was a journalist on Russian soil.
And of course, on the flip side of those concerns, we have the families of Gershkovich and Whelan. I know we've heard from Gershkovich's parents. We've heard from Whelan's brother, who have both been making this plea for them to return home. And I know that they've been in communication with U.S. officials, right, Olivia?
Absolutely. The families here are the ones where your heart really goes out the most. And especially in the case of somebody like Paul Whelan, who, as you've been discussing, did get passed over effectively into additional negotiations that resulted in the release of Trevor Reed before him and Brittany Griner before him. So he's been the longest held American in Russian detention, and his family has been doing its best to keep his case in the media. His brother reaches out to journalists all of the time to provide an update on his case, to say Paul has written us to say he was beaten today or he got an orange today, to provide details that humanize the experience that he is having in a very severe Russian penal colony. His sister Elizabeth has been very active, engaging U.S. government officials traveling to Washington, D.C. to get in people's faces and make an effort to actually effort change in his case. In the same way, the Wall Street Journal obviously has unspooled a great campaign in order to keep Evan's case in the news. Hashtag slogan, journalism is not a crime. They know that the more attention these cases get, the more likely it is that pressure mounts on a given administration to actually fight for these people's release.
All right, Olivia Gazis, thank you so much. We are continuing to follow the latest on this major prisoner swap between Russia and the U.S., and our coverage continues right after this break. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.